On April 1st, 2024, the carbon tax in Canada went up by 23%. It equated to about 3 cents an increase in gas if you have a gas car and you tank up. But there's a lot of people who are very angry about an increase in tax. In fact, the government, the opposition of the government, the federal government, tried to put in a no confidence vote for this increase, failed to do that, to win on that no confidence vote. And there's just a lot of misinformation on this carbon tax. And to be honest, I want to talk about it because it has to do with a bit of science communication and just good communication, or good misinformation communication, I guess, is what it really comes down to. And so we're going to talk about in today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. And this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about how misinformation can really skew somebody's perception of something that's, when you call it what it is, a tax, is not fun in the first place for anybody to pay, especially during these times. But the misinformation train is getting out of hand, like really getting out of hand here in Canada. In 2019, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a history of the carbon tax and how it's kind of going through. I'm not going to go through like the increases and everything like that, like specific year by year by year, because that's not the point of this episode. The point of this episode is to talk about how misinformation has actually gotten out of hand, so much so that it's really disparaging sort of what is actually happening with the carbon tax, the purpose of the carbon tax. And of course, it's misinformation and lack of good communication on the other side. Misinformation on one side and lack of good communication on the other side, which is why we're talking about today on a Wednesday, where I like to talk about science communication and speaking up for the ocean, because carbon tax is there to help the planet. It's there to help the ocean, whether you agree with it or not. That is the Nobel Prize winners have actually come out and said carbon tax or doing some sort of carbon pricing is what's a good way and the least impactful way on the economy to help with climate change. That's what these Nobel Prize winners have said. And I'm going to refer to you and put in the link in the show notes, a fantastic video on the Canadian carbon tax and sort of its implications, the good and the bad on the economy, right? Because it's not perfect. The way the government's rolling it out is absolutely not perfect, but it's something that needs to be done. Okay, so watch that video. It's from it's a company called the Goose Media. Very well done video. Totally recommend it to everybody to be able to watch it. It's not really politically partisan. It's not skewing one side or the other. It's kind of looking at both sides, which is what journalism should be doing. But here's the thing. In 2019, the carbon tax was implemented and people had to pay a price on carbon. Now, it doesn't necessarily just come in and just say, hey, you use this amount of gas and you did this and you use this amount of natural gas to heat your home and this amount of electricity, and then you calculate your carbon footprint and then you pay a tax on that. That's not how it works. It's how much gas do you pay for? There's a tax on that. You can get a rebate from that. How much natural gas to use, there's a tax on your bill for a carbon tax when you heat your furnace, when you use the electricity and so forth. So there's certain things that are taxed that will, like especially fossil fuels, that will cause greenhouse gases, and you are taxed on that. Companies are taxed on that, and that's really where it's supposed to go, is the companies. Residents are also taxed on that, but it's really supposed to go to the companies to start to incentivize companies to use better technology and cleaner and more efficient technology in the way they run their business. So that's including fossil fuels, including like warehouses, mining companies, factories, industries, and so forth are your typical ones that emit greenhouse gases in their wastes. And those are the ones that are being taxed so that they can, incentivize them to say, hey, look, you will pay less tax if you use better technology. and more efficient technology and less wasteful technology, like less greenhouse gas emitting technology. That's the purpose of the carbon tax. Everybody gets taxed, and that's the purpose. Now, the way it rolled out is in Canada, the way it works is, we have a federal system, and then we have our provincial governments, and then we have our regional and then municipal governments, right? So the regional would be, if you're in the States, would be very similar to counties. The province, obviously, very similar to states, right? Exactly. You have states, we have provinces. And of course, different countries have different things. The provinces had the ability and were given first rights to say, come up with your own carbon pricing system. So some of the provinces had their own system. Alberta had their own system. Believe it or not, Alberta, which is known as sort of the oil province, that's where the tar sands are mostly, had their own thing, right? They had their own system. They had British Columbia had their own system. Quebec came up with their own system. Okay. Ontario had a system. It was a cap and trade system that worked fairly well. But when the Conservative government got in just before 2020 under Doug Ford, they decided to scrap anything that has to do with, carbon pricing, anything like that. They scrapped it. Now, the deal that is set out from the federal government is that if the province does not come up with their own system, they will have to use the federal system of the carbon tax. So not every province, not everybody across Canada pays the carbon tax that everybody is talking about. Okay, that's sort of the purpose. So there's a lot of things going on. The Conservative government got rid in Ontario. I live in Ontario, so I know mostly about Ontario. They got rid of their cap and trade system. They implemented the carbon tax. Why am I saying this now? Like, why am I talking about this now? Because like I mentioned in the pre-intro, on April 1st, a couple of days ago, the carbon tax, the federal carbon tax went up 23%, which equates to 3 cents per liter on your gas, right? That's how everybody's really thinking about it. Now, the interesting thing is the government right now is a liberal government, very similar to Democrats, a liberal government, center left, I would say. And then the opposition is right. And I would say usually used to be center right, but now it seems to be more on the right. Regardless of that, Pierre Poliev is the leader of the opposition. Trudeau is the Prime Minister of Canada, so he's the government. He's the Prime Minister of the government. Now, Pierre Poliev has been on this tirade over the last year or so, or really since he's become the leader of the opposition. He has been talking about axe the tax, and he's talking about the carbon tax. He is blaming the carbon tax for every single problem that Canada has. He's blaming it for increase in food. He's blaming it for increase in gas. He's blaming it for increase in cost of living. He's blaming it for the increase in housing, the housing crisis that we have right now, where just things are being priced out of everybody's range. I don't know if my kids will be able to afford a house. Really don't know about that. That's what's happening for a lot of people, right? A lot of people are hearing this constantly from him. Every time he gets in front of a camera or a microphone, he is talking about axe the tax. He's talking about how Trudeau is ruining Canada, how people are leaving Canada, it seems like in droves, according to him, because of this carbon tax, because the cost of living is so high because of this carbon tax. Now, studies have shown, even from the Bank of Canada, studies have shown that the carbon tax is only contributing to 0.12% of inflation. 0.12%. The rest are like housing, groceries, all that kind of stuff. Okay? And that goes into a lot of political stuff that's very different. I don't want to go into that with the housing and the groceries, because it's just more political than anything else. I want to focus on the carbon tax because that's been the focus of the last few days and the last really couple of weeks coming up to this increase. A lot of the provinces in Canada right now, I think it's the majority, have conservative governments. So we have a liberal or democratic leading government, federal government, and then we have a lot of the different provincial governments tend to be, except for a few, tend to be conservative. What's interesting is in Alberta today, on April 1st, there was a gas tax implemented on the same day, which equated to a 14% increase in gas, which equated to 4 cents a liter in gas. Okay. These are all the statistics that I've been hearing about and seeing videos on and everything like that. So there's a 3 cent increase in Alberta because of the federal carbon tax, because the Alberta government got rid of their original provincial carbon pricing, and they had to use the federal carbon tax. So there was a 3% or 3 cents per liter increase on that, on top of a 4 cent increase on that. So that's 7 cent increase per liter in gas in Alberta. But then it's just so convenient that, the carbon tax is getting blamed for it. And people in Alberta do not like just the federal government in general. There's a lot of history there. However, they really don't like Trudeau. They really don't like Trudeau. The convoy, the truckers' convoy, I would say originated in Alberta, but a lot with the truckers, but originated Alberta. A lot of the major players that were blamed for the convoy were in Alberta. So they don't just, it's not that, I'm not saying anything about the convoy, I'm just saying Alberta tends not to like Trudeau. A lot of people don't like Trudeau, but this is especially in Alberta. So they're blaming the carbon tax. And, of course, the conservative opposition of the federal government is blaming the carbon tax. Everybody's blaming the carbon tax, and how we're pricing us out. Justin Trudeau is making us pay even more. They're not suspending it. They're not doing anything. Now, there's a couple of problems with the carbon tax in general. We pay extra tax on the carbon tax. So we get charged the carbon tax for our gas and things like that. And then that's not exempt from paying our federal GST, which is the goods and services tax that we pay, which is 7%. 6%? 6%. It's 6%. In Ontario, we pay the harmonized tax, which is provincial and federal that are together. So we pay 13%. And so, we have to pay this 13% on top of the carbon tax. People don't like that. I don't blame them. I don't like paying a tax on a tax. It kind of sounds redundant. But the government, the provincial government, as well as the federal government, is making a lot of money on this, right? On just the tax we pay from the carbon tax. So people are angry about that. People are angry about paying for taxes, like increase in taxes. People are angry for a lot of things, financially, because it is tougher times. The money we used to make back, even 5-6 years ago is not the same amount of money we're making now, even though our it's not worth the same, even though our salaries haven't really gone up that much when you really think about it in terms of inflation. So there's a lot of people who are angry, but the problem is there's such misinformation about the carbon tax and how it was implemented and how it was forced upon people to take, that people are really going the opposite direction for climate change. Instead of supporting work that will be done to combat climate change, people are just so angry at the carbon tax that they're looking at climate change as just a government conspiracy to get more money to them. We had record wildfires, and I was in a Facebook group, and this is all anecdotal because I'm looking at it from my lens and the lens that I see on social media, which, we all know with the algorithms, it's you look at stuff that you constantly see, and because they start serving you stuff that you've seen because you like that stuff. So in this dad's Facebook group that I have in Burlington, you see a lot of posts recently about a study that came out across Canada saying our air quality has gotten worse in Canada. It's actually fallen quite a bit, out of like the top 10 that we used to have. Because we used to have, we have one of the largest boreal forests across Canada. It stems across Canada. It's a beautiful, beautiful forest, right? Our air quality is better because of it. And because last year we had record wildfires where the entire stretch of our boreal forest, which takes up our entire country, which is the second largest landmass in the world, burnt a lot. Not totally, but burnt a lot. People lost their lives, their homes, their livelihoods. In fact, Some of the fires aren't out yet, even though we've had winter. We had one of the mildest winters we've had in a long time. And some of the fires are still burning. They're still smoking. And so we're worried, scientists are worried, and government's worried that those fires are going to start up even earlier than last year. Normally our wildfires peak in around September of every year. Last year they peaked, or they were above those peaks already in June. Now we're worried that's going to happen more. We had so much fires that it affected our air quality to the point where we were told to stay indoors, and we were looking at our air quality index numerous times in Southern Ontario, where you don't normally have that problem. This is the first time I think I've ever seen it in my 46 years of life. I'm turning 46 this year. Wow. But this is the first time I've seen it where you could actually see the smoke in the air because of Northern Ontario's boreal forest was on fire. You saw the videos in New York City that were affected by the Quebec fires. You saw the videos elsewhere where it was just like the sun, was blocked by the clouds, and it made it look like this eerie apocalyptic kind of color in the sky, and people were wearing masks, and it was awful. And now, like so there was a report that came out about the air quality and saying, hey, the air quality is so bad in Canada now because of those wildfires. So in this Burlington dads group where I live, on Facebook, you start to see it's like right. It's just people are just starting to go with conspiracy theories. It's just conspiracy theories. And they're talking about how, these climate communists, that's what they're calling climate activists, or anybody who speaks up about climate change. You're a communist now. And so they're saying climate communists are the ones who set the fires. And it's just like this. These are the conspiracy theories that we're hearing because people are so angry about paying the tax. This is all around, the talk about the increase in carbon tax. All the comments where this carbon tax is BS. The carbon tax is a money grab. The carbon tax is a way for, climate change was invented by liberals so that they can get more money to pay for more government to be big government. That's what is the narrative that is being spoken to it. And to be honest, at some point, I don't blame people because you hear so many negative things from the opposition government. So many negative things. Every time a conservative that's on the opposition is on TV, you constantly hear them complaining about the carbon tax. Carbon tax is increasing our food. Carbon tax is increasing housing. There's a reason, and a lot of it is false. A lot of it, the journalists are fact-checking it afterwards, and it's false. And we're seeing very similar things happen in a lot of politics. I see a lot of politics in the U.S. where you see the same thing. When politicians are in front of a camera or in front of a microphone being interviewed, they spew this stuff that is really compelling to people because it speaks to the narrative that they want to hear, and then only gets fact-checked after, but it doesn't get fact-checked right then and there. And if they try and fact-check it to them, all of a sudden they're just like, oh well, no, that's not right. You're a shill for the government. That's what you do. That's what's happening in Canada. That's what we're seeing in Canada. I'm not sure if my American friends have seen that like in the last few years, maybe the last 10 years or so. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that kind of tactic. If you don't like people questioning you, you start to berate them in front of their colleagues, in front of the cameras, make the media look really bad, make the media say, well, you're just speaking, you're just, Trudeau's mouthpiece. That's what Pierre Poliev, the leader of the opposition government, has talked to, CBC reporters, which is funded partly by government, or funded by government, which, AP, Canadian Associated Press reporters are, as soon as he doesn't hear what he wants or somebody questions his tactics or the facts, and he just says, well, you're just a mouthpiece for the Trudeau government. That's what you do. You just work for Trudeau. And so it just takes the media, totally disparages the media. People don't believe in the media anymore. I know media has problems. Mainstream media has definitely problems. But when you have government starting to do that, instead of starting to be accountable for what they're saying, whether they're right or wrong, be accountable for what you actually have to say. That's an important part of government, being accountable. And this is not happening. And so the misinformation, the attacks on media, the attacks on environmentalists, the attacks on, and now these aren't physical attacks, they're just, words, but it's just constant. It's every single day from the same person, the same party that wants this tax. It is exactly what the oil and gas companies did for climate change denial in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s and 2010s that they admit that they've done today, that they've actually been fined for in a court for doing that they're being sued for. Right? I'm not sure if they've been fined yet, but they've been sued for that because they've come out and said, yeah, we want to maintain our profits, which are not suffering, by the way. In Canada, between Shell and Imperial, which is ExxonMobil, they've made $64 billion in profit last year. $64 billion in profit. They're not suffering at all, right? But they don't want a carbon tax because it affects their business. It affects their bottom line. They're not going to get the biggest profit. They're not going to continue to grow in profits, which is what they do year by year, it seems. Right? So all this misinformation that I've been talking about has been getting to people. It's been getting to to Facebook. It's been getting to all the different platforms. It's been getting on national TV because reporters want to report on it and then they want to show it to people, right? Because it makes news. People want to hear that news. They want to hear the drama that happens in politics. But it's interesting now. We're starting to see people refute back. People like politicians, not just the government, but other opposition. So we have multiple parties in Canada, political parties. And so there's multiple political parties on the opposition that have been elected. And so they're even getting tired of the negativity of the opposition because the opposition is not actually proposing anything new. We're probably going to have an election in 2025. We are probably going to have an election in 2025. We have a minority government right now that's being propped by another party, the NDP, the New Democratic Party, who's supporting the government right now because they want a pharmacare plan. They want better health care. And we're actually getting that right now. It's being implemented right now, which is great, which is really great. However, there's going to be an election in 2025. This Axe the Tax is really contributing to that election, what's going to happen in the next election, and the misinformation around that. Now, the question is will people get tired of the negativity, and not proposing anything new? Or is it just going to continue on? There's a good chance that Trudeau will not be prime minister after 2025. And it scares me because the Conservative Party has traditionally bailed out on anything climate change related. And there's no talk from this Conservative Party and this leader, Pierre Poliev, about whether they're going to do anything about climate change. Right? They want small government, but they're very much against climate change. They're very pro fossil fuel. And the thing is that our economy is propped up by fossil fuel. So if the oil price goes down, our economy bottoms out. And we're not very good. There's actually been articles that have come out saying that our country is not producing enough in different things. We are very much oil and gas, and that's about it. And that is scary for us because we're not diversified. And what happens when you don't have a diverse ecosystem? If something happens to that one thing that's propping up the ecosystem, we die. We go bye-bye. We're in trouble. And it hasn't happened yet, but it could happen soon. And if we don't change, that's a big problem for us in the future. And so this misinformation that continues to come out that I'm sure the fossil fuel industry is loving, right? The politicians are loving, and the people who hate Trudeau want to hate him for something. So let's give him something to hate, is the carbon tax, which is interesting because like that video that I'm going to link to in the show notes is actually talking about how when the first carbon tax came out, it was actually proposed by conservatives. Right? It just comes full circle. It's just hilarious, the hypocrisy and all this kind of stuff that goes on. Now, anybody in our sort of history in Canada, leaders who have proposed the increase or have proposed an increase in tax have never really fared well. People always hate them when you increase taxes. But It has to happen. Things have to happen. We need to be incentivized to be able to do something. I don't like paying more money to the government as much as anybody else, but if that's what they're coming up as a solution, we have to do something because it's better than doing nothing. We have to do something about climate change because it's better than doing nothing. And carbon pricing is the most effective way from an economy standpoint, from what all these Nobel Prize scientists have said. That's what works and has the minimal impact on everybody, but that's what works in the long run. Until we come up with something new, this is the solution, and we need to do it. But it could get taken away if a new government gets elected who's very much against it. Or they may just leave and just say, what did I say? No, I didn't say that. Because that's what governments do on both sides of the aisle. I have no faith, no confidence in any of our government leaders because they say the same thing. They do the same thing every time. Doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. They do the same thing every time. And it's getting pretty frustrated. This is a rant. This is getting frustrating for me as a citizen, as a scientist watching this. And the environment is what is being dangled in front of us and is being used as a pawn in sort of the power landscape in a lot of governments, especially here in Canada that we're seeing. And it's extremely frustrating because people are not taking the climate seriously. We've had one of the worst on record years of climate change and climate change impacts, and it's not going to get better. It's just not going to get better. And we even hear some reporters asking our Minister of Environment, well, the carbon tax has been in place since 2019. How come the wildfires haven't stopped? This is showing the ignorance of a lot of people on how climate change works and how it doesn't work. That's really what it comes down to. And I'll leave you with that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on the carbon tax, on this episode, on climate change. DM me on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. That's at How to Protect the Ocean. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And of course, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at speakupforblue.com/newsletter. Just put in your email. You'll get an email 5 days a week with all the news and job ads and latest episodes we have on our network of podcasts, including How to Protect the Ocean podcast and Beyond Jaws, every day every weekday in your email. Okay, so thank you very much for joining me on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.